Hello everyone, this is Dr. Kingston, and in this video we're going to be talking about the gastrointestinal system's layers. In this video we're going to walk through the different layers of muscle and connective tissue that make up the gastrointestinal organs, and we're going to take special note of where nerves and blood vessels travel. Alright, so let's get started here. So first off, let's just make clear that we're talking about the organs that actually make up the alimentary canal. So things like the liver and the pancreas are going to have their own internal structures that are not related to what we're going to see here. The stomach and intestines, though, these are all going to have all of these parts. Alright, so with that in mind, when we're talking about our GI tract organs, we're talking about four-layered organs for the most part. We're going to define superficial and deep relative to the organs themselves while we're talking about them. So superficial is going to refer to this outer portion of the organ closest to the peritoneal cavity, and deep is going to refer to the layers that are closest to this innermost empty passageway here, the lumen. All right. So the most superficial layer is typically the serosa, which is another way of saying this is the visceral peritoneum that covers the surface of the organ. Okay, so this would be equivalent of like visceral pleura or visceral pericardium that we saw up in the thorax. It's underneath there is primarily an areolar connective tissue, and its outer surface then is covered by epithelium that's going to secrete a lubricant onto the surface of the GI organs. There are some cases where GI organs are not completely surrounded by visceral peritoneum, though. So cases like the esophagus and the rectum. When that happens, the outer layer is simply called the adventitia. So adventitia is essentially serosa without the epithelium. So it's just that underlying layer of connective tissue. Deep to the serosa, then, we have the muscularis, and just like its name says, it's composed of muscle. For most of the GI tract, this is smooth muscle, but we do have a little crossover from somatic skeletal muscle that happens in the upper GI tract. So you consciously control the striated muscles of your pharynx or your throat, and you can try swallowing right now to prove this to yourself. But once you get like 2/3 of the way down the esophagus, so way down into your thorax now, you don't need that sort of control. So there's a slow gradation in the esophagus where striated muscle makes up less and less of those walls as you go down, and smooth muscle makes up more and more until you get to the end and it's all smooth muscle. The smooth muscles in the lower GI tract are arranged in two layers typically. The fibers of the outer layer are arranged longitudinally, and they help to break down things passing through the tract. The deeper layer is made up of circular fibers. So here you see nice longitudinal fibers, and here you see circular fibers there. And these are going to fire sequentially to push GI contents down distally toward the end of the tube. The muscles here are all going to receive innervation through the myenteric plexus. The myenteric plexus, remember, is going to receive both postganglionic sympathetics and preganglionic parasympathetics from the preaortic plexuses. So those are the ones surrounding the aorta and its three big branches in the abdomen. The sympathetics come in, travel through the myenteric plexus here, and the parasympathetics come in and actually synapse right here at these little ganglia within the myenteric plexus. And then their second neuron in the chain is what's going to travel to the muscle cells that it's innervating. Deep to the muscularis, then, is the submucosa, which is a loose layer of connective tissue, and that is going to make a great place for nerves and blood vessels to travel around in. This is where we find our second enteric plexus. So we're right here. Here's our blood vessels. Here's our submucosal or Meissner's plexus. And remember, this is for regulating secretions from the glands down in the mucosa. It's also going to regulate vasoconstriction in the wall of the organ here, so that's going to change how much blood is able to reach these absorptive tissues down here. The deepest layer then is the mucosa, and we're down here. It's also the most complicated layer, and it's going to surround the open lumen here, right? It has these 3 sublayers, and these are going to look a little bit different depending upon where you are in the digestive tract, and we will talk about that with individual organs. All right, so our epithelial layer here is what lines the lumen. So it's in contact with everything that passes through the GI tract. In regions where you've got rough textured boluses passing through, so like the upper GI tract, mouth, pharynx, esophagus, that pass food that you've just ingested and you've only kind of roughly chewed it up, they have what's called a stratified squamous setup for their epithelium. I know you got to go back to like the first lecture for the class here. There's no absorption going on here, and the extra layers of cells like this interlock, and having extra cells here means some of these can actually get sloughed off without causing too much damage to the deeper structures. So more distally in the GI tract, we switch to a simple columnar epithelium, and this allows for better absorption of nutrients. So this is what you find in the stomach, small intestine, where a lot of absorption is going on. Now, at that point in the digestive tract, there are still a lot of caustic chemicals that can cause a lot of damage to these cells. So they end up being replaced every 5 to 7 days usually. All right, so moving superficially away from the lumen, we run into a layer of areolar connective tissue, and this is where we find blood and lymphatic vessels traveling. So that's what these little green specks are. This area is sometimes referred to as MALT, or mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. We also call it the lamina propria a lot when we're talking about GI organs, but it's found consistently in all the mucosa we're going to talk about here. And then finally, surrounding these two, there's a very thin layer of smooth muscle that sits sandwiched between the rest of the mucosa and the submucosa here. This is important to note that it's only for folding the mucosa, the epithelial layer, and changing the shape of that. It's not for propelling contents through the GI tract. So changing the shape of the mucosa exposes different regions of these epithelial cells to GI content, and that's going to allow for more nutrient absorption. All right, and that is going to bring us all the way in to the center here, which is the lumen. All right, one practice question for you before we reach the end here. In which layer would you find the parasympathetic ganglia that regulate mucosal folding? All right, admittedly, that was a little bit of a mean question. These are actually located in the submucosal plexus because the only nerves in the myenteric plexus are the ones that are going to be innervating those circular and longitudinal fibers that actually participate in peristalsis. The layer that regulates mucosal folding does not do any sort of propulsion. Okay, so this is located in the submucosal plexus. And that is going to bring us to the end. Thank you for listening.